Welcome back to Photoshop. We're going to move on to Chapter 2 and Learning Plan 2 in Blackboard. Chapter 2 covers resizing, cropping, and transforming our images. And we specifically are going to talk about the difference between image size, canvas size, and resolution. We're going to talk about what resolutions you need for print output or for web output. And we'll learn how to resize an image by making it smaller for web use or possibly larger, but not too often. We're going to use the crop tool. We're going to learn how to straighten also and how to scale, rotate, skew, and warp. So I'm going to be working through the textbook, and because of that you're going to need your textbook files. If you downloaded the entire zip package last week, you'll be fine. If not, if you want to come down further in Blackboard, the files for the book exercises are right here, and the files for the workbook are right here. And I'd also like you to download this Pictures for Class. We may pop in and use some of these pictures as we practice with some of these tools. So click on this to download it. And once it's downloaded, you'll have to double click to unzip it, or on a PC you'll have to go and extract the files before you can use them. Once you've done that, we're going to use Bridge as our starting point. So launch Bridge, and from Bridge we're going to navigate to our book folder, and we're going to navigate to Chapter 2 book exercises to start. Once Bridge is loaded for you, I'd like you to look over in your favorites column. If you followed along last week, you probably made your book files a favorite. If not, you'll just need to navigate to wherever they are stored in your downloads folder, your documents, or whatever the case may be. But within your Photoshop book files, we're going to go to the textbook and we're going to open up Chapter 2. And we're just going to see the different pictures that the book has supplied us to work with. The one that we're going to use first is the fox, the single fox. And if we just do a quick look here in Bridge, we'll see that it's 3,400 pixels wide by 2,300 pixels wide. The total weight of this image is 631 kilobytes, and it's recorded in 72 pixel per inch. That's the mode. So these are some of the things that we're going to figure out. So go ahead and double click on the fox, and that's going to open it in Photoshop. And here's where we're going to talk about image size. So what do we mean? Is it the size of the image as we see it on the screen? Is it the size of the image when we print it on paper? Is it the size in megabytes, size in pixels, the resolution? Yes, it's actually all of the above and a variety of everything. So we're going to learn what these different things mean and when we use the terms and how to use them correctly. So the first thing we're going to start with is our basic image here that's called the fox. And we're going to zoom in on this image, and the keyboard shortcut that you should be using is Command+. So zoom in and keep zooming until the pixels are very obvious. I'm here at 3,200%, and I can see that the pixels are a square filled with one solid color. You can't have a mixture of colors within the boundary of the square pixel. It lights up one color and one color only. So when we get close, we can see a variety of shades here. If we zoom out, Command-, we'll start to see that because they are so tightly packed together, we start to see them just as continuous color when we get back to the 100% view. So pixels can only be one color, and we use them to give continuous tone images, photographs, proper look. All right, how big is our image itself? Besides being at 100%, we can also do a fit on the screen. So from your bottom left, where you have the percentages showing down here, you can change it there and do a smaller percentage, maybe try an 80%. Or you can just right-click on the image. Well, you can. Perhaps we need to be in the zoom tool. Right-click on the image and choose Fit on Screen. You need to be in your zoom tool for that tooltip to pop up, which is unfortunate. So fit on the screen is, whoops, going to take it down a little bit smaller so that it fits within the size of the screen that I'm working on in Photoshop. All right, Command 0 will also give you a fit on screen like it does in Illustrator. I'm not sure why I'm getting all these, all of these error messages popping up. There we go. Command 0, fit on the screen. Another thing that we can do is we can go up to our image menu at the top, and we can see three different things here: image size, canvas size, and image rotation. The image size and the canvas size are actually different, so we're going to look at that first. Option Command I or Alt Control I on a PC is what gets you to the shortcut to image size, and this is a pop-up window that you're going to use quite a bit. This image size dialog box lets us do a couple of things. We can change the actual image size by altering the number of pixels that we see here, and or we can change the printout size by changing the resolution. So currently this image is 48 inches wide by 32 inches tall at 72 pixels per inch. So all of those little squares that we saw, 72 of those are jammed in on a vertical and horizontal basis inside of that square per inch. So we can change our size by changing the width right here. So let's say we only wanted this to be 12 inches wide. And because this lock right here is turned on and we changed it to 12, the height was automatically changed so that it keeps the same proportions. We don't have to guess. If we had that off and we said make this 12 by 3 inches tall, do you notice in my preview how it smashed it down? It's not proportionate anymore. That's not a good look. So I'm going to go back and lock this. It defaults back to its original, and I'm going to say I want to make this 12 inches wide. Height stays at 8 because it's proportionate, and our resolution we're not changing. It's still going to be 72 dots per inch. I want you to notice that the image size had been 22.8 megs. It's now down to 1.42 megabytes, which means that a lot of pixels, a lot of data were thrown away to make it smaller. It went from 48 inches down to 12. This is typically exactly what we're looking for when we take a high resolution photo or a large photo from our cameras, for instance, and we want to use them on the web. So we do expect to see it go down in size. If we click OK, our resulting picture is going to look small on the screen, but remember, oops, depending on what view you're using, this is not the actual size. This is a view at 55%, or down here in the lower corner you can see 55%. So if we do a command number 1, that brings it up to 100%. If your rulers are not showing at the top and left, you can turn those on with the command of Command R, or check this box here in the View drop-down menu. Command R will toggle your rulers on and off. So now we can see the 0 starts right here. This is 12 inches wide and it is 8 inches deep. This is exactly the size it would appear on somebody's monitor if you used it on a website. So web images, images that we optimize for use on screen or on phones, iPads, devices, we use 72 pixels per inch as web resolution. There is no need to use higher resolution images on websites, mobile applications, whatever, because those devices tend to display at 72 dots per inch. There are some exceptions, but by and large, your web images should be resized to 72 pixels per inch, PPI. That is the same language that we use for print, but we call it a little differently. In print, we call it dots per inch because it's dots of ink that are placed down in a 1 square inch area to make that image look continuous tone like a photograph would. So print resolution is 300 dots per inch or pixels per inch. Web is 72 dots per inch or pixels per inch. So this was the way we were able to change this image and make it smaller. Now that we have done that, I want us to back up and undo some of our steps to get back to the original size. In the Edit menu, there's always the Undo button, which is Command Z, and you can do that multiple times. But there's also another option within Photoshop that's very helpful, and it's called our History window. So if you go to the window and come and put a check mark next to History, we're going to get a pop-up window here, and all of the steps that we've taken will be listed here. So if we resized it, changed some color, used a paintbrush, did this, did that, all of the steps would show up, and we can actually back up to whichever step we'd like in increments. So we've only done 2 things here, so we can easily just go back to Open, or you could have done the Undo Command Z step once. We only had 1 step involved, so it was quick. But the History window can be helpful if you've done a bunch of things and then you realize, ugh, I wish I could go back like 12 steps. You can. You just need to come to this window and click back. We'll be using that in the future as well. So here is our big image, our original image, and we're going to do that same process again with some different settings. So image, image size, or your keyboard shortcut, Option Command I, and we can see some other options, but let's again take a look at where we start. This is a 22.8 megabyte file. It's a high-res image. It physically is 3456 pixels wide by 2304 tall. Some fit tos that we could look into are some preset options. So if you always wanted a 4x6 at 300, you maybe could try that option and see how it automatically resizes it. But most often we want control over this, so we stay in this main window. If we needed to measure in something other than inches, we can do that as well. So we can say, okay, I know it's 48 inches, but I want to work on the web, so I need to see it in pixels. So we just change the measurement to pixels. This matches what we know the image is. And let's just say that we are told your image that you're giving us for the website should be 600 pixels wide. Again, we would change the drop down to be pixels. We would type in 600. Because we have the lock, it's going to automatically determine the height to keep it in proportion. And once again, because we have 72, which is web resolution, we don't need to change that at all. The resample button should be checked when you are downsizing. What this box does when it's checked, resample basically gives Photoshop permission to throw away all the unnecessary pixels or to add pixels if you are making something larger. This is where it gets bad. We typically don't blow up or enlarge pictures because the original pixels that are available to us are our limit. And if we get larger, Photoshop has to guess what to add, and it usually doesn't look too great. So resample gives it permission to throw away pixels, and because of that, I want you to notice that we went from 22 megabytes down to 703K. If this button were unchecked and we said make this 600, well, inches, no, pixels. Well, pixels are out. Notice all it can do, because we're not giving it permission to throw away the pixels, it has to use them all. The best it can do is take this down to a resolution of a mere 5 pixels per inch, but it's still going to be 600 inches wide. This is ginormous. So allow the resample, allow it to throw away, and allow it to go down from the 22 megs that it was to that lower number, and our resolution should be 72. Oh goodness, I'm making a mess because we have inches. I'm going to hit cancel. The nice thing is if you're playing around with this and things aren't right, you can always cancel out and come back. So image size, here's the original. We want to talk in terms of pixels, and we want to take it down to 600 pixels by 400. We say OK, and here's our resulting image. All right. let's take this image that we just resized down and do a Command Z or an undo, get it back to our original size again. And let's talk about making this a high resolution image used for print. So again, we're going to go into our image size dialog box. And here the thing that we want to change is the resolution. 72 pixels per inch lit up is what we get on the web. But when we print, we have a higher resolution of 300. Now look what happened when we did that. This checkbox was still on, which gave Photoshop permission to delete or add, and look what it did. It added. It bumped up our size dramatically, and it bumped up the image size. It went from a mere 22 megs to 395 megs, and look at how this preview is absolutely horrible. A shortcut, if you botch something up here, rather than canceling and having to reload the whole window, is just to hold down the Option button and notice that the Cancel button right here turns into Reset when you're holding the Option key on your keyboard. So I'm going to hit Reset. So in order to get this to change, we have to uncheck Resample. We don't want it adding pixels. We want it to use the pixels that it has, these 3400 by 23, but instead of letting them be 72 per inch, we're going to smush them down and make 300 of them live in the same square inch. So we're going to change that to 300. Notice that we went from 48 inches down to 11. So basically we're at 11 by 8 inches tall. Our file size didn't change. It's still 22.8 megs, and all of our pixels are still there. None were thrown away. So we can say OK to that. So now when we look at image size, it's going to be measured in high resolution, 300 dots per inch, and everything that we had available to us from the get-go is still there. The 3400 pixels by 2300 are just pushed closer together for the purpose of printing. All 300 pixels per inch are going to give us the continuous tone that we expect to see in print. All right. So in your textbook on page 38, there's a blue side of the page that is extra information that you may be tempted to skip over, but don't. So we're going to talk about it. What is the best resolution? So resolution really only affects how closely pixels are spaced out when they're printed on paper. That spacing is what determines the final print size, and it has an effect on the quality of the printout. So if you're preparing a color or grayscale image that's going for professional printing, offset printing, the resolution value that we use most often is 300 ppi, pixels per inch, dots per inch. It's large enough to accommodate most situations, but not so large that the file is too big and hard to handle. So, nevertheless, there's an accepted formula that lets you determine the exact resolution you need, but you have to know what kind of paper stock is being printed on. So if you guys can picture newspaper and how it's kind of cheap, it's very cheap paper, and if you drop a drop of water on a newspaper, it spreads out quickly. You see it spread. So you can imagine that if you added a drop of ink to newspaper paper, it would spread out quickly. As compared to, maybe you can picture a magazine that's got really heavy, glossy, beautiful, heavy paper. One drop of ink on that is going to absorb into the paper differently and not spread as far. So when you know what paper stock you're using, there's something that is called lines per inch, and that's a printing term that's used. So just as the Photoshop image is made up of rosters of these tiny pixels, a 4-color offset printed piece is made up of a pattern, very tiny pattern, of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, CMYK dots. They all get put down together to create these different colors. The spacing of these dots is determined by the line screen value. So because they sit differently, there are different line screens for different uses. So if the dots are close together on newspaper, they're going to run together and give a muddy effect. So a typical line screen value for coated paper, so that's more of a glossy paper, is 133, 150, or 200 LPI, lines per inch. This is totally different than dots or pixels. Newspaper stock requires coarser line screens of only 85 to 100 lines per inch. So the formula to determine lines per inch that are needed is the image resolution, the pixels per inch, should be 1.5 to 2 times the line screen. So if our image is destined to be printed on newspaper stock using a 100 line per inch, then our Photoshop resolution should be 1.5 to 2 times that value, or 150 to 200 ppi. Using that same formula, you can see that a 300 pixel per inch image is sufficient for most jobs that run at line screens of 150 to 200. When in doubt, go with a higher resolution. So desktop printers, the ones that we all own at home, are not obviously, as fantastic as a commercial offset printer. So to get good quality at home, we really only need 200 dots per inch or pixels per inch resolution. But because we are graphic designers, we're going to think in terms of high res means 300 and low res or web means 72. Then for the printed side of it, you have to know what your ultimate output is going to be on paper. And if you're printing a newsprint, it's different, and you have to take that into consideration. In your homework, you're going to have a picture of a lighthouse, I believe, and you're going to be asked to resize it 2 different ways. One of the ways is specific to dots per inch or pixels per inch. The second version is specific to lines per inch. So remember to come back to this blue page in the book and look at the line per inch formula to understand that when you do that second part of the homework. All right, something else in the image size dialog box that I'd like to point out. If you ever see a little gear up here, this is like more settings, and you can click on that. And if this scale styles is lit up, that means that you have some styles applied to your image, and it's asking you if you want to scale them as well. An example would be if we put an outline on this image, maybe a black outline on it, and then we had a drop shadow coming off of it. If we had a 10-point line around it and a 10-point drop shadow, when we resize things, do we want those to scale proportionately, or do we want those 2 things to stay at 10 point? Almost never do you want them to stay. You almost always want them to scale proportionately. So if that's an issue, if your special effects aren't scaling and you can't figure it out, always check this gear right here. Remember, this is where we lock our width, height, and resolution and make them all work together. We can unlock them. Well, we can. Nothing's working here right now. I love it when I give demos and things don't unlock. Unreal. Unlock. Okay, seriously. I'm going to come back to this in just a second. The fact that the unlock isn't turning off is driving me nuts. All right, I'm going to hit Option on my keyboard so this turns into a reset, and I'm going to come back to that so that no changes are made. And I'm going to say, okay, we're going to move on, and we're going to actually resize this image specific to something that is needed for print. So page 40 in your book, we're going to resize this image for use in InDesign. InDesign is a software that you're going to learn next term that brings everything together for print production. So if you're doing magazines and books and multi-page documents, InDesign is going to be for sure what you want to use. So let's say we wanted to resize our fox to 6 inches wide and bring it into Adobe InDesign for a brochure. Since it's going to be professionally printed, we're looking for a 300 ppi. So image size, and the first thing, oh shoot, it's still at 300. Oh, if yours is at 300, I guess we're one step ahead, because the first step the book asks you to do is to upsize this to 300. I didn't go back and change that from our previous demo, so we now have a 300 high-res image at 11 inches by 7. All right, now we want to check the resample button, and this is going to give Photoshop permission to physically remove some of the pixels as needed. So what we want to do now is we want to change the width to be 6 inches. And if you hit Tab, you move down to the next step. Notice it automatically made it 4 inches because that's what was needed to keep it proportionate. So we now have a width of 1800 pixels up here, which is the same as 6 inches. And this is going to be resized. It's high res, so it's ready to go for use in print. Let's say OK. And here's our image at 100%. You can tell it looks bigger, but that's because it's 300 pixels per inch, so it's showing up much bigger. All right, last thing I want to show you is what if you want to do something completely on your own and resize it. In the image size dialog, we could uncheck these now, and we could say, you know what, 6 inches is fine, but I only want it to be 3 inches tall. Now you notice our preview changed, and where it's going to take away data or squish data, we have no control over. So if I say OK, not so good. There's a much better way of getting exact sizing if you want exact dimensions one way and another, not necessarily proportionate to the image. And that will allow you to throw away parts of the picture that you don't need. So I'm going to click undo, our fox comes back to normal side, and we are good to go through page 40.